Hello, this is Property Matters, a weekly catch-up on all matters property, supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. We're live every Sunday on our website, propertymatterstv.co.uk, and of course, YouTube, Facebook, and our Facebook groups too. And if you're watching on our website, don't forget to hit that Google review button, leave us a nice review on the homepage. And you can also leave your comments wherever you're watching us on social media too, and we'd love to see your comments on the show today. If you'd like to get in touch, it's hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk. We're also available as a podcast every Monday on the podcast icons you can see there, and we're live on Dilsa Radio as well, so we welcome our listeners there. We also welcome our property expert to talk through all this week's news. It's Joe Joshi.
Yes, good morning. Good morning, everybody. Good morning to our listeners and good morning to our viewers, those that are going to be bothered to get up on a Sunday morning, especially when it's nice and bright and sunny. And then you've got to see my mug and Paul. So, I mean, I know where I would be, but listen, that's the choice we take. Every Sunday morning, we're here live to share with you whatever's happening in the property world each week.
And we've got some facts and figures this week, because you know how much I love my facts and figures, Joe. And we've got the Zoopla UK House Price Index for May 2023. It's a mixed bag, let's just say, to try and put the most positive spin on it. Prices fall 1.3% in the last 6 months, but the pace of the fall is slowing. Prices and activity continue to adjust to the impact of higher mortgage rates and rising living costs, leading to a 1.3% decline over the last 6 months. In recent months, the rate of monthly price falls has slowed as buyer confidence improves. Sales are increasing as a result of falling mortgage rates, in terms of the being more competitive at least, and a strong labour market. The annual rate of price inflation is down to 1.9%, and it was 9.6% this time last year. So your house price was rising 9.6% a year ago. Now it's only rising by 1.9%. And of course, inflation's way ahead of that. At a regional level, house price ranges from -2% in London to 3.6% growth in Wales. They're saying they expect, Joe, that prices will remain broadly static for the rest of the year. However, higher than expected inflation data has increased the probability of further interest rate rises, which we've always been saying on this show. This will have a knock-on effect on mortgage rates, which appear likely to edge higher in the coming weeks. This would reduce the buying power in the second half of the year, and the impact depends very much on how much the rates increase. The biggest hit to housing activity in 2023 will be seen in the number of housing sales, which they expect to be 20% lower this year. So there's 20% less business going on, Joe, and it all depends on what the banks and the government say as to how successful a year the industry has. So that's in a nutshell. What's your thoughts?
Do you want me to say all of that in one shot? Well, thanks for that. And I know you love your facts and figures, and Zoopla are great at producing this executive summary, as you put up there now, every month at the beginning of the month, and it kind of sets the pace. They're not far from the reality of it. There is a mixed bag of things going on as far as I can see. The positive spin that I'm going to put on it is that, of course, we are still up in terms of our values. We're not completely in the negative approach yet. And from year on year, so that's a good thing. Houses are still the best form of investment that people were likely to make, in terms of, and that's why people are constantly wanting to be on that property ladder pool. That's what drives them. There are a number of areas that matter. Of course, investment is important, but more than anything else, it's a home that they can say that they own and have of their own, rather than going out renting. So I think you're absolutely right with those figures. It's not gone off the Richter scale, but it has slowed, and that's slowed for a number of reasons, as we know. The main reason, of course, being that the inflation is so high, so they've been whacking up the interest rates, I don't know, 5 or 6 times already, and we expect probably another couple, if not a bit more. I've always predicted that we'd end up at 5%. People are now saying 5.2, 5.5. I'm hoping that it is going to be at 5%. And they've been stress testing lending for some time on this. So they know that they've been stress testing at 7% and now I think around 8%. So in terms of interest rates, that's fine. I think the biggest thing that's always caught us is the other costs that have just been piling on: food prices, rates, electric, gas, etc., etc. Those are the ones that have been probably unknown, even though they're saying that that is dropping a bit. But in terms of house prices, as far as I'm concerned, just everybody's going to stay steady. I expect that we will probably see a further decline, only in the sense of mortgages, because I think that we haven't had the full impact of the people that have had their fixed rate mortgages, which have not come off. But over the next 6 months, I anticipate that some of those will come off. And so that's where we will start to see a further correction, if you want to call it that. I like to call it a correction and not a downturn. You have to remember that, going up at the rates house prices were going up even a year ago and before for the last 3 years, something had to give. What is the government going to do? I think the government have got to really think very carefully about what they've got to do. I'm sure they have a strategy. I'm sure they know that there's a storm coming, as I would call it, and we're just a little bit calm before that storm starts to hit, and that would be my worry. But I think the courts and the lenders have been forewarned to take certain kinds of steps or not take any steps at this moment in time until we get through the storm, and that is that there's a lot of people that are probably in arrears on their mortgages who cannot match or meet the higher increase on their mortgage rates at this moment in time. And so we'll find that towards the second half of this year, which we've now started in, we will actually find that there might be a little bit more less purchasing power, in the sense that the mortgages are going to become tougher to get. But availability of stock has become far, far more fluid, especially when you think a year, 18 months ago, there was hardly any stock around. Now there's a lot more stock. And one of the areas that obviously is bringing that stock is the buy-to-let market, because the buy-to-let market has been pretty much killed off. And that needs to be revived in a different form. And I think, the government's got to really seriously look at that.
Yeah, absolutely right. You mentioned a couple of points there. I mean, this is the graph on screen now. So demand is down 14%, number of sales agreed up 11%, and the flow of new homes is positive for the first time in ages, 16%, and the stock of homes for sale is up 10%. You could have turned this graph upside down 18 months, 2 years ago, because we had no stock. Loads of people, demand was through the roof. We had loads of people wanted to buy. There was nothing to buy, and the graph was the other way up. And as you say, the landlord situation, as we had on the front slide, which we'll talk about in more detail in a second, which was the fact that the figure shows 11% of all listings. It's 1 in 10 of all properties are formally rented out buy-to-let properties. We'll come on to that in just a second. What they do say, there is some positivity here. I've just found it. It's been looking for a long time. But despite the demand, the weaker demand, the number of new sales agreed in the last 4 weeks is actually 11% higher than the 5-year average from the same period. So over the last 5 years, it's 11% higher than the best that it's been in the last 5 years. That's in the last month alone. As many buyers are also selling, because they're selling somewhere and buying somewhere, so that's helping the activity. Obviously, more sales boosts the new flow of homes up by 16%, as we've mentioned there, over the 5-year average. But they're saying that they must remain. They are selling, but they've got to be remaining realistic on prices. Some 18% of homes currently listed on Zoopla have had the asking price cut by 5% or more, compared to 28% in February. Price reductions typically come 8 weeks after the first listing, as they try and get some interest. As they've been there for 8 weeks, no one's really coming round, or had a couple at the first week, and then there's been no interest, and they've been forced to bring the price down. I presume that resonates with the current situation you're finding.
Yes, I mean, prices have to be corrected, and it's a buyer's market, Paul, at the end of the day currently. So wherever possible, the buyer has the chance to make an offer, providing, of course, they can get the funding. I mean, that's the key thing. It's all very well making an offer that they think they want to be able to do, but if they can't get the borrowing, then that offer doesn't mean anything. So, you've got to really tailor the deal accordingly. Yes, so it is a buyer's market, and prices are showing a bit of a correction. But that, if you look at across the boards, and you'll show in your summary probably, and time comes on, is that there's just no set pattern at all in my mind of where and what is going on. Okay, there are some areas that are doing exceptionally well, but broadly speaking, there are no particular areas that are now the ultimate place to go to. Whereas a year ago we were having those discussions, and there was, the Midlands and the North and all that kind of stuff was really coming into our conversation. Whereas right now it's spread right across from the northeast, from Scotland right down to sort of Wales and across the board and down into the southeast, southwest. It's just everywhere. So it's just about the moves that are happening, I suppose, are now what I call social moves. They're needs moves, either schooling, personal circumstances. Whereas what the move we had in the last 3 years were, the race for space, the flee out of the big city. The pandemic created its own reasons of why people wanted to move, and of course they were getting better prices in London, or in the cities, and they were getting a better value for money out in the sticks, for example, in Wales, or in Birmingham, in the Midlands. So all, the whole thing is literally turned upside down at this moment in time, just like our graph at there as we see it, because the demand has changed. It's become a buyer's market as opposed to a seller's market, and it will change again. 18 months, 2 years down the road, we could show the graph and it will twist again. And that's the good thing about the housing market, that it's always been fluid and it's always gives you something to sort of keep going on at. But people will never stop buying property. They still are very keen to buy their home, even at the current rates of mortgage.
What's interesting actually is 1 in 10, 11% of homes that were previously rented are now being sold. But that peaked, that figure, in 2020, when it was 14% of homes that were previously rented out. So it actually has been higher than now. And I kind of fascinated as to why that was never actually something that we reported on back in the day, because it was surely it would have been something that would have been disruptive in the market, in the fact that people couldn't get rented homes. But what's interesting is 5 years on, around half of these homes, these 1 in 10 homes, return to the rental market. So basically, people put them up for sale because they were getting out of renting, being a landlord, and half of those would have been bought by another landlord and then rented out. But the rest would have gone to people like first-time buyers and so on. And obviously, these rented homes typically have an asking price, they're saying, of about 25% lower, so they represent good value. But now, of course, only a third of those properties are being bought by another landlord and then rented out. The other 2/3 are now going to actual buyers who are going to live in the property. So the price difference being 190,000 for the average ex-rental stock versus 250 for a starter home for a first-time buyer. So they're great deals, but there's less landlords going after rented stock for the reasons that we've stated. So an interesting time and a great time to be involved if you can afford the monthly repayments, of course, as a first-time buyer. And that's where the rub is, I guess.
Well, I mean, first-time buyers are equating their current rental value. So if you're renting a two-bedroom flat in most areas now, it's 1,500 pound a month, maybe more. That was £1,000 before. That was maybe £900 a month. And the one bedroom was probably at 750, 800, and that's now at 1,000, £1,100 a month. So what people are looking at is, if you've got that much commitment in a rental, do I go out and try and get a mortgage? And the answer is, this is the time for those rental people to go out and get a mortgage, because the price difference is there. Availability of stock in their reach is probably there now, because the investors are not going in. The investors are not going in, not because they can't afford to, it's just because they financially have been absolutely, strangled by the taxation and all the other things that they've got to do. And especially in some cases, older stock where the leases might be lower, the rental income is now not sufficient to cover their borrowing at a historic level. So they're coming out of the market and saying, look, you know what? And then there's the taxation. They're being taxed on this. There's no give on the buy-to-let market at the moment. So if there's ever a time for a first-time buyer to jump on the property ladder, this is a great opportunity for first-time buyers to jump on that. Yes, there will be stress tests for their mortgages, but I will say to you again one more time that you don't have to do a mortgage by yourself. You can group it, with members of family or friends or whatever, and up to 4 people can certainly borrow. So it's a bit of a slow burner, but it's a way to get on the property ladder. And now is a good time because value-wise, you're picking up probably better bargains. Not always the ones that are rented out, primarily because they've got tenants in them and they're going to be stuck there for for some time, maybe another 6 months, maybe a year before they get notice to move out. But those that have been vacant, a lot of landlords have decided that once they're vacant, they're just not going to keep them. They just don't want to have the headache. They want to get out with old stock. So it's a great time for first-time buyers to put their first foot on the run of the ladder. And of course, lenders are coming to the market for first-time buyers. Lenders are coming with other packages like 100% mortgages, and I'm pretty certain before long we will get the help to buy schemes back on scale, and all of those things will push the prices up and push the availability and push the opportunities for the first-time buyers to get back onto the run of the property ladder.
Cities are certainly having a bad time of it, Joe. If you look at what we have on the screen here, I'll describe it for those listening on the podcast, of course, but if you look at somewhere like Norwich, you were looking a year ago of the annual price growth of around 13%. It's now down to about 2 or 3%. Bristol, around 10%, 3% now. Brighton, Reading, Glasgow, all suffering. London is now in negative growth, and Aberdeen is the worst performer at something like minus 2% growth this year in price changes. So the city's having a tough time, and we're getting some reaction here as well. Let's just say good morning to Guy. Morning, Paul and Joe. I would say the stats are difficult to read at the moment as the market has so many things tugging it from all angles. What is sure is that there's not many homes being purchased for letting, and the stock is reducing, and that strengthens the landlords over the tenants where there is a lot of demand. That's an interesting point, actually, because Gove is determined to stop landlords riding roughshod over tenants. And the situation where there's a lot of demand for a property, the landlord is in the driving seat, isn't he?
Well, the landlord are in the driving seat because stock is becoming lesser and lesser. And of course, if you're, especially when those landlords that are coming out of the marketplace, and Guy's absolutely right in that. I mean, there's a lot of people that are just saying, you know what, once a property becomes vacant and perhaps it's got a short lease, so either they've got to consider about, extending that lease. They've got to also think about 2025, which is really not that far away, where they've got to get it up to EPC C standard, though it's not law yet, but it's definitely, if Gove has anything to do with it, it will be law before you know it. And all of those things are extra costs that are going to say, well, you know what, this is a time for me to cut and run. The landlords are cutting and running and getting out of that, which means the supply is becoming very, very limited in the letting market. So those landlords that are in there are now actually able to demand a higher rent, and tenants have got to have a good relationship. Otherwise, they will move them on or charge them more money. So there's a lot of mixed bag information going on right now, and I agree with Guy. There's no one thing that is working. It's just a case of each one has its own merits, and you've got to work individually with the. It's a bit like the song, Paul. The communication is the answer to the problem. I mean, we just got to make sure that people are communicating with their landlords, their agents. And likewise to make sure that they all achieve. And it's equally important for agents, if they're going to be staying in the game, is that they've got to make sure that they are doing what they're supposed to do correctly in order to make sure that landlords support the agent, and of course tenants continue to use them.
There does seem to be a lot of variation in activity across the regions, and certainly since the pandemic we've seen many people looking to move to more remote or away from cities, remote areas. So if you look at Scotland at the moment, excuse me, demand is up. It's the only place in the country where in the UK where demand is up, and sales are up almost 30% there. So that's a very healthy looking market. On the other side of it, you look at demand in the southwest, it's down nearly 30%, and yet sales randomly are up something like 9%. So I'm not sure if the demand is that low and that much reduced, how sales will be increased. But it does say that above average growth has impacted the affordability. It looks like people have looked at the markets and said, look, prices there are just silly. Let's look somewhere else where we can afford it. So if you look at London, for example, over the last 7 years, Joe, prices have just gone up 12%, whereas they've gone up 47% over the same period of time in Wales. Average earnings increased by 30% over the same period. So areas with house price growth outpacing earnings align with those where demand is well above the average at present. In contrast, the regions and countries where the lowest rate of price inflation since 2016 are recorded, there's been some stronger activity. So London still suffering, and certainly from what we're seeing here, the city centres still not as popular as they once were.
Yes, I mean, it goes back. If you just flip back the charts for the last 3 years, all of that was reversed, and London was doing nothing because everybody was leaving London. And we'd said at that time, wait for the time, because it was the international market wasn't allowed in. Pandemic was stopping people flying in, and people weren't traveling in and out. Everybody was fleeing London because of the coronavirus at the time. They all wanted to go out, and so at that time, all of the outer regions were beginning to do amazing, and London was the one that wasn't. But we always said that it's only a matter of time when the doors are open back, the international market comes into London, and here is the result of that situation: an increase in London, though the increase in Wales is much higher, and that's primarily because of affordability of what they can actually get. You get a lot more for your money in Wales than you are going to get in London. So, there is going to be that sort of change that's going to happen. But I think that looking at it from my point of view, I just don't see any particular one region now, whereas it was, a given that it's either London or it's going to be, the north or whatever. But right now, I think it's going to be a mixed bag of wherever that demand and supply is. And the supplies are pretty good at the moment, because not only is it the renters that are putting their properties back on the market, but there's a lot of ordinary people that are moving. The other thing, of course, there is the fall-through rates. The fall-through rates are actually much higher than are reported at this moment in time, as primarily people start to buy a property and then find that for a number of reasons, and probably the number one reason is affordability, they are not able to then conclude. To give you an example, and this is purely an example, we had a sale going through, which the guy started his transaction in September last year, and basically he decided that he was going to borrow the money to go. That mortgage came through 10 days ago, and the mortgage has to complete by the 6th of this month, next week. Now, that was just an impossible task. So what they've done is, first of all, they take their time in getting the mortgage out. And in the meantime, that sale has actually fallen through to that particular buyer, but he left it running just to get his mortgage offer through. He got his mortgage offer through and then said, can I buy it now? And of course, we'd sold it to another. In the meantime, I said, well, you now need to find another property. He said, but I've only got 10 days to complete. The mortgage offer is only standing till the 6th of June. So if I don't find something that is going to complete, well, of course, what's going to happen is he's going to find something, and they've got to go through the whole process again for that particular property, do another survey, another valuation, etc. And it could be another 2-3 months. So it's just an absolute carnage in the system for borrowing. Equally, I have to say, my favorite subject of all is, of course, the conveyancing, the archaic system that then takes them forever to actually do a basic job of a simple transaction. You could be there 3-4 months. So because of that, there is a number of fall-throughs that are happening, which we're not actually seeing related in our figures individually, but they are probably there globally. That, so there are sales, and then there are fall-throughs, and then there are sales again. And you could do that 2 or 3 times in that given period before you get the end result.
Interestingly, we've had some other commentary here, and It says perhaps the variations in growth around the country are due to Michael Gove's levelling up policies. Somehow I doubt it, which I thought was rather good. I no doubt there'll be a point where he does claim that actually, yeah, we have actually addressed the imbalance between, say, London and Wales, for example. He's bound to want to claim that at some point, I would suggest, don't you?
I just think that this is not a leveling up thing. This is a statistics and the economy scenario,
Yeah.
and of course Michael Gove would want to have something out of this, and the best thing they could do is probably take him out and, I don't know, put him on garden leave or do some leveling up in his garden. But he's not doing a particularly brilliant job in leveling up at this moment in time. If you actually look at this whole situation. The thing that has always helped the UK is the building out and the building work, because it actually motivates other parts of the industry as well. And right now, everybody is just holding their nerve because the interest rates have been killing the market. We knew that in a funny sort of way that would come. We always knew that the interest rate would, come back to this sort of level because they were too low. But it's the other bits, when you think that people like Shell and BP are telling you how many billions and trillions of pounds of profits that they're making at the back of all of these people, it just goes to show that leveling up and that policy is not right. They should be bringing some of that money back into those people that are suffering, and they're suffering because all of a sudden they chose to put everything up. And they blamed it on, of course, the Ukraine war, which they're not really helping to soften and finish off. They're just fueling that as well. So there's some method behind that madness. But if I would get in front of Mr. Gove, I will ask that question. But he's always ducking them. He's always ducking everybody.
He's very good at that. So they're saying that to sum this up, they're saying the net result is that the build-up of market momentum in the spring is likely to weaken in the second half of the year, with the scale of the impact depending on how much the borrowing costs increase. If they say that if the mortgage rates stay around about 4 to 5%, that's consistent with house price growth of anything between 2% in the best areas and minus 2% in the worst areas, with around 1 million sales a year. So as long as we continue to see a strong labour market, that's where they think we're going to end the year. So around 1 million sales and growth somewhere between -2 and 2, depending on where you are in the country. So we'll keep our eye on that, I guess, Joe, and see where that takes us. I just wanted to pick up on a little bit more detail because obviously one of those big figures in there that we have talked about quite a lot, but just to touch on the fact that 11% of property sales are from buy-to-let landlords, which of course they're just not making the figures work, are they? Because, with mortgages to pay, with higher rates and energy costs and increased regulation, it's just not a viable business for many, is it?
No, it's just been made completely unviable, and the problem is that in my view that the government have really not seen this correctly, because in a heartbeat there is going to be a bit of a storm coming from people that are not able to manage their borrowing, manage their mortgages. Maybe the repossession numbers will go up, and where are they going to put those people? The government haven't built enough property. Local councils don't have enough stock. And they managed to shoot themselves in the foot by actually making it difficult for investors to buy, to let. And a good number of those properties that they are taking away and put it back on the market now, the 11% you've got there, are all properties that perhaps at one stage were rented out to local authority tenants, have come to the end of their time, and the landlord said, you know what, I'm giving notice, getting out, because it's now no longer viable. So the government has to find spaces elsewhere for these people to live in. And that may mean that they have to shift them in other parts of the country, which isn't always the most favourable way to deal with things, because people have their own communities, their families, their infrastructure, their doctors, nurses, etc., that are schooling for children, all set, and that all gets disrupted because obviously the local council are no longer able to house them in an area where they want to stay in. So yes, there are more properties coming onto the market which were formerly let out, but as they become vacant, they are coming to the market to be sold. And as we said earlier on, a great opportunity for first-time buyers, because they are the properties that they would normally have had a chance to buy, that investors bought, but now there's a chance for them to buy.
It's interesting, isn't it, that the both sides of the industry have such different profiles right now. So you've got a dwindling seller's market and purchasing market, and you've got a rental market that's getting hotter by the minute.
Yeah, I mean the rental market is bubbling over and over the top because the whole way that borrowing is now calculated, the stress test, and of course, what they require in order to meet the criteria from the banks is not achievable. So people are saying, we'll go and rent. Having said that, even the rental market has to have a form of calculation to make sure that they can rent those properties and pay those letting costs. This was not the case 30, 40 years ago. It was a case of I've got a deposit and I've got this and I can go in and do it. But now, they have to be checked out thoroughly to make sure that they also can have affordability. So it's affordability all round that is creating the problem in terms of the tenants or the buyers. But because it is tougher as a buyer, they're beginning to look at being a tenant. And of course, that supply and demand is kicked in, Paul, because the demand is high on the tenants, and of course, the supply has become limited. Hence, the 11% of increase of sales, properties available. All those properties that were originally available to rent are now available to sell. Wrong time, but circumstances has stated that. So the demand for the letting property is very high, and the demand for the sale property is only enough for the first-time buyers, but the investor market is off the line.
Final story today. This is the first time we've ever commented on an actual business, but it is an interesting situation. I know one that you have some interesting views on. So for those that are not aware, Purplebricks at one time was a former business valued at around £1 billion. It was the darling of the AIM market. And it was a brand feared by mainstream estate agency businesses. It was a great disruptor, it was called, but from game changer to just a handful of change as competitor Strike has picked the business up, including its £30 million worth of liabilities for just £1. This is an article published this week by Russell Quirk, who's a commentator on the property industry that we all know. His thoughts on the prospects of Purple Strike, as I believe it's going to be called, are that smashing together, it's a bit like smashing together Betamax and Blockbuster. It's unlikely to yield a great outcome. Strike sells homes for nothing, and Purplebricks can't make ends meet even with fees that are just shy of the average for most of the country. Despite that, the fact that Purplebricks has been saved, let's be honest, this is how it all looks. They've consumed already Strike £75 million of the owner's Charles Dunstan's childhood inheritance so far, and Purplebricks makes losses in the 20s of millions of pounds a year, with huge liabilities and with potentially expensive litigation still hanging over its head. So Sam Mitchell is the new day-to-day boss of the business and says that he's doubled down and pledged publicly to continue to commoditise estate agency and sell its services on the cheap. He and Dunstan talk of becoming the Amazon of the estate agency world, by which perhaps they mean a descent into a depleting dark forest full of snakes and bugs that's easy to get lost in. This is the words of Russell Quirk, not us here on Property Matters, but it's an interesting view, but it is amazing how this business has consumed so much money, and does suggest that actually, fundamentally, people who are selling a house don't want it too cheap because it suggests they won't get the best service.
Yes, it's an interesting subject that you bring to the table, Paul, and I'm sure people like Guy, if they're still in, will have their tuppence worth as far as this is concerned. But for me personally, having been in the property industry for as long as I have yet to find a successful disruptor that has come to the market and actually has really shown us the way of a traditional estate agency. I understand and I accept that traditional estate agency has to have some level of modern twist, and that's because from newspaper advertising, we went into online through portals like Rightmove and so forth. but there's nobody that does anything specifically different other than the fact that it's the person that does the job. And that's where owners actually time and time again have come back and said we would rather pay the extra fees or the fees because it is a real emotional sale. um, we don't know how to handle that situation. There's too many people in it, and so subsequently it takes a good quality, someone with good experience, good knowledge, good understanding of the system to be able to hold their hands and get them through to a sale and get them moving. You know, moving home is probably in the top 5 of the most stressful things that happen in your life. And then people like Purplebricks, and many others that have come and gone or merged because they want to offer it for, and Strike within 6 months, maybe a year, I'll give it, will be also out, because there's no such thing as a free lunch. It's just not going to happen. And you know, if 1.1 billion plus or 1.4 billion at its top value as Purplebricks is sold for £1, that just tells you what Strike's going to be. I mean, Strike will be at zero, minus zero. I mean, it's just not worth doing, even talk about. What happens is in the city, people come up with these fantastic ideas, you know, sell it cheap, stack it high, that kind of thing. But you can't take the personalities out of this business. And people like Russell Quirk have been in that business and been doing this very same thing, tried it, and has, you know, come back to being a commentator because he knows that the reality is that in this business, people buy people first. You know, if they don't like you, it doesn't matter what you're going to do. You know, it might be a Purplebricks, the commissary and the money they've spent on. You know, one good thing is that they lifted the profile of agency and itself, but what they did in that journey is also shot themselves in the foot. And you know, I like the idea of Purplebricks in the sense that they did a great marketing job, but to do it for nothing just is there in front of you now, what that actually results in. And billions of pounds of people's money that was, you know, put into investment, showing them that that would be the way. There is the value of that return. You know, they would have been probably better to buy lots and lots of houses, and at least at 1.3 or 1.9% increase this year, they would have probably come off better than being investing in Purplebricks. And there are so many these would-be startups that come to the market, come in and say that they can do it. I remember, I'm sure Guy would remember, people like Mr. 1% and Mr. 0.5%, and all these people that came into the market, came in and went out as quickly as they came in, because there is so many other costs that people don't actually value in this business, Paul. They don't understand that there are advertising costs, there are premises costs, there are staff costs, and so forth. And Purplebricks is sitting on a small time bomb of staff cost, because they're going to have to pay, you know, I think it was £6 million on average each month of staff bills, which they haven't paid for a lot of people. So actually, it gives the industry a bad name when people like this come along, tell you they've changed it, disrupted it, and actually have just created a bit of a bonfire for everybody else to tidy up. And, you know, good luck to them. Purple Strike, well, that's probably going to be striked off before you know it. But Purplebricks is had its day and done and gone. There was others, I think Yopa and several other people that came and went, all came up with the same idea on the back of this. It's just that, you know, if it works, they think, oh, well, let's all jump on the bandwagon and we can do it. I got involved with Easy Property, I think it was, for a while, and that was just a nightmare of what it was. Again, somebody came up and went, oh, we can get into this, we can do this for £1.99. I thought myself, that's an area that we need to look at, and it's very quick. I had to come off of that. I could see that it just couldn't, it was just not a model that worked, and they didn't work. So all they wanted to do was take your money and actually not do any support. And where are they? That's all gone as well. So, yeah, it's a sad day for Purplebricks. Sad day, more so a sad day for the property market, property industry. But long may people like this not exist.
It does say in the article, which is interesting, is the problem is the belief that cheap online estate agency is actually a viable thing. And they're saying that actually it's 20 years old. The concept of cheap online estate agency is now 20 years old. It's had £250 million thrown at it to prove the concept. And the only thing that's been approved is that 95% of sellers still want to pay a traditional estate agent to do the job, which, as he admits himself, he knows to his own cost. And he says insanity it was Albert Einstein that said insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. The one thing he does say that's come out of this 20-year experiment is the establishment of the self-employed estate agency business model. So those that are self-employed and going out and doing the job themselves because they know they're good, they actually are better off being self-employed because they know they can take more of the reward for themselves. So he says we've got one thing to thank the online cheap model for, and that is the establishment of self-employment within the industry. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, Purplebricks brought in a model of that. I don't particularly want to thank them for that. I think United States of America was the real pioneer in that. And as much as it was a no success, again, by Century 21, who brought up that whole concept of self-employed realtors into the UK. The UK just didn't take that on board, but it's taken 20s of millions of pounds for people to get out there and get self-employed status up. And that's something that I've always felt was a great model for agency, because it is a community-based business. Wherever you are the person that people will go to. And that's why agency exists in pods. It exists in different areas. So you might find that, you've got one company that was there. So for example, I go back to someone like Mann & Co, which was my original employer where I started my life as an agent. Mann & Co grew as it grew in the neighbouring towns. So, if you had an office in Staines, Feltham, Egham, it was done by community because those communities supported that branch, and that branch felt that it could do some good business. And that's how it was always grown. But each of those branches had a manager that either made it or didn't make it. And the reason was that they either went in and worked with the community. So there's somebody who was local to that community, knew that community, made a success of that particular branch. So it was clear and is clear that our business is based on the personality that lives in that particular area. And I think that is a great growth for all sorts of people, especially agents. And it opens a lot of doors for a lot of people using a hub and then growing that. So if Russell wants to thank Purplebricks for that, it's fine. But I would think that this model has come from the US. That's where it originated from, because in the United States of America, they did that. And when Century 21 came to the UK and I was working with them, I liked the idea, so I went and joined them to do that. But they weren't ready for it. We didn't want that change. We didn't like that idea. And yet now Purplebricks will claim that. So I agree with Russell to the point that it does, and it has brought the change in. And I think it's a great model, great way for people to be part of a business that once you are part of it, becomes part of your DNA, it's part of your veins, part of your whole thing. It can be very good, very successful.
Guy agrees with you. Purplebricks, no threat at the moment. Conditional sales and self-employed agent opportunities are growth areas, but no Purplebricks. So I think he's pretty much in alignment with us on this Sunday morning. So, Joe, thank you very much indeed, as always, for your wisdom and your knowledge and your comments as well. And thank you for watching us on Property Matters. Back same time next week.